Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am Joey Francis, your life, love, and relationship coach. Thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to episode 69. And because this is episode 69, we're going to talk about sex. Yes, I know. I am a massive child. But come on, how could I not take advantage of such a fantastic opportunity? Anyways, with that being said, as easy as it would to make this episode cheap, that is not where I want to take it. I think this conversation we're about to have matters. I think it matters in dating, it matters in relationships, and it even matters in marriage. It matters for anyone who wants real intimacy with another human being. See, this episode is about why people can have sex faster than they can talk about sex, how that silence creates problems, and why communication and acceptance are the foundation of real intimacy. Because this is where a lot of people get it wrong. They look at a sexless relationship or a relationship where the sex feels awkward, disconnected, forced, routine, or unsatisfying. And then they think the sex is the problem. And a lot of the time, sex is not the problem. Sex is where the problem finally becomes impossible to ignore. That is the part people miss. By the time sex becomes the argument, the issue has usually been living somewhere else for a while. It may have been hiding in resentment, emotional distance, insecurity, stress, rejection, pressure, poor communication, or years of pretending something did not need to be said. Eventually, all of that walks into the bedroom, and then people act shocked when the bedroom feels different. But why would it not feel different? The bedroom doesn't exist in some separate universe from the rest of the relationship. It carries the relationship into it. If two people are disconnected outside of the bedroom, that distance will eventually show up inside it. If there's resentment sitting between them at dinner, that resentment does not magically disappear because the lights are off. If someone feels unseen, unheard, criticized, pressured, or emotionally alone, their body is probably going to know that before their mouth admits it. This is why sex talk matters. And I don't only mean one dramatic conversation where you sit someone down and make everything uncomfortable. I mean the ability to speak honestly about sex as part of a real adult relationship. Before sex happens, while intimacy is being explored. Afterwards, when feelings, expectations, and reality needs to be understood. This is where a lot of people struggle. They are willing to be naked before they are willing to be honest. And when you really think about that, it's insane. Two adults can take their clothes off, share their bodies, risk attachment, risk confusion, risk pregnancy, risk disease, risk heartbreak, risk disappointment, and still somehow feel that asking a simple, honest question is too much. That says a lot about how uncomfortable people are with real intimacy, because sex and intimacy are not automatically the same thing. Sex can be physical. Intimacy requires honesty. That does not mean sex always has to be serious. It does not mean every sexual experience needs to be wrapped in deep emotional meaning. Grown adults are allowed to make their own choices. Some people are more casual about sex. Some people attach quickly. Some people see it as a step towards commitment. Some people need commitment and emotional safety before desire really opens up. The problem begins when two people enter the same physical experience while giving it completely different emotional meaning. And neither person has the courage to ask what it means to the other. This is how confusion gets created. Think about early dating. Two people are talking, they're flirting, feeling attraction, maybe going on a few dates. There's tension, there's curiosity. Then there is that moment where sex becomes possible. Instead of having a conversation, they let the moment decide for them. The moment is not always wise. The moment is often driven by chemistry, loneliness, excitement, alcohol, ego, insecurity, or the desire to be wanted. That does not automatically make the moment wrong, but it does mean the moment should not be asked to carry a conversation that two adults were too uncomfortable to have. This is where people get hurt. One person may think, okay, this means we're moving forward. The other person may think, that was fun, but I never promised anything. Neither one had to be evil for pain to happen. Although, let's be honest, the person that was never promising anything yet engaging in sex may have been a little bit more transparent. But they simply avoided the truth long enough for their assumptions to collide. And that is why I always come back to communication. I know I say this constantly. I probably sound like a broken record at this point. But I don't care because it is so true. Communication is the most important thing in any and every relationship. And right behind it is acceptance. You need both. Communication gives people the truth. Again, provided you're being transparent and honest. But here's the thing. Acceptance decides whether that truth can exist safely between them. A good example, and this is something that I have to tell a lot of people. Let somebody tell you who they are and accept it. Don't try to change it. Don't try to modify it. Don't try to adjust it. If somebody says, this is who I am, this is what I want, this is what I'm ready for, then just believe them. It's that simple. And I know it's so hard for so many of you to do. If you tell someone what sex means to you and they shame you for it, there's no safety there. If someone tells you they are not looking for anything serious and you pretended you did not hear it, you are the one that's not accepting reality. You were the one that's making a choice. You have the information and you're choosing to ignore it. Now it's on you. It's your fault. If one person needs more time and the other person turns that into pressure, the conversation did not create intimacy because the truth was punished. That is why communication alone is not enough. A lot of people say they want honesty, but they only mean honesty that does not inconvenience them. The moment the truth hurts their feelings, or challenges their ego, or forces them to make a decision, they react badly. Then later they wonder why the other person stopped being honest. You cannot punish honesty and expect intimacy to grow. That applies to sex in a very specific way because sex touches parts of us that are extremely sensitive. Confidence, rejection, desire, insecurity, performance, body image, shame, attraction, and worth can get all tangled together. Even people who seem confident in every other area of life can become defensive when sex enters the conversation. This is why the sex talk has to be handled with maturity. It cannot become an attack. It cannot become a performance review. It cannot become one person making demands while the other person feels cornered. The point is to understand each other, because understanding is what gives intimacy a chance to work, hell, to become even better. A simple conversation before sex might sound like, and I'm talking more like the first time, I like where this is going, but I want to make sure that we are on the same page before it goes further. And I know there's a lot of people out there that tend to avoid that. And they think with a schedule or with a calendar, we've been on X amount of dates, like it's time that we do this. we've been seeing each other for X long. It's time that we do this. And it's not, because being ready doesn't have a timeline, doesn't have an amount of dates that you have to go on before you're supposed to be ready. You're ready at your own pace, and bringing that up and having that conversation. It's not weird. It's not dramatic, and it's not ruining the mood. That is what being an adult is like. And honestly, if a sentence like that scares someone away, maybe that tells you everything you need to know. A respectful person may not want the same thing as you, and that's fine. The conversation is not there to force agreement. It is there to reveal truth, to provide you with safety. Once you have the truth, you get to choose what you do with it. Not ignore it, understand it, embrace it, and then move forward in whichever direction that you want. That is the whole point. You are not asking questions to control someone. You are asking because your body, your time, your emotions, and your peace matter. This is especially important because sex can create emotional consequences that people love to pretend they are above. I hear people say things like, it was just sex. And you know what? Sometimes, for that person, maybe it's true. Maybe they're able to separate emotion and sex. But that does not mean it was just sex for the other person. And that difference matters. A lot of heartbreak starts there. Two people do the same thing physically, but emotionally they are in two completely different places. One person leaves feeling closer. The other leaves feeling satisfied, but unattached. Then the texting changes, the energy changes, the expectations change, and suddenly everyone is confused. A conversation would not solve every issue, but it would at least give both people a chance to choose honestly. That is what I care about. It's choice. People deserve to choose with real information. If someone wants casual sex and says that clearly, the other person can decide if that works for them. If someone knows they get attached through sex, they can communicate that instead of pretending they are fine with something they know will hurt them down the line. If somebody needs exclusivity before sleeping with someone, that should be said plainly, and not just said, but followed too, because there's so many people out there that say it and then don't do it. You need to stick to your guns. There is nothing weak about knowing how you operate. There is nothing needy about telling the truth. The weakness is pretending you are fine and then resenting someone later for believing you. Better yet, resenting yourself for doing it after the fact, regretting it. Simple thoughts, simple decisions, simple conversations can happen, and regret doesn't even need to exist in your life. Now, talking about sex before it happens is only one part of this. People also struggle to communicate during intimacy. And I think that's where a lot of awkwardness, disappointment, and insecurity gets created. And I'm not saying people need to narrate every second of what's happening. Nobody wants sex to feel like a customer service survey. But two people should feel safe enough to slow down, adjust, guide, laugh, pause, or speak up when something does not feel right. That kind of safety changes everything. We are human beings. There is a lot of complexities to each and every one of us, what we like, what we don't like, how we want something to feel. And by talking about it, guiding somebody, feeling safe enough to do so, is just going to leave everybody happy at the end of it. And as you do it more and as you learn more, sex only gets better. Because good sex is not built on mind reading, it's built on awareness, communication, comfort, attraction, trust, and safety. It is built by two people who care enough to pay attention to each other rather than perform some version of what they think sex is supposed to look like. Performance is a huge issue. A lot of people are not actually present during sex. They are worried about how they look, how they sound, whether they are doing enough, whether the other person is judging them, whether they are taking too long, whether they are not lasting long enough, or whether they are measuring up to some invisible standard they picked up from porn, past partners, or even their own insecurity. And that's exhausting. It pulls people away from the connection. And on top of it, it makes it suck. It makes it like work when you're always worried and just trying to do the right thing when you literally have the person right there who can tell you what the right thing is. Real intimacy requires presence, as in, don't be stuck in your head. You cannot be fully connected to someone while mentally auditioning for approval. At some point, sex has to become less about proving something and more about experiencing something together. And that only happens when there's enough emotional safety in the room. Emotional safety is not created by accident. It comes from the way people respond to each other. If honesty is met with kindness, people open up. If vulnerability is met with embarrassment, defensiveness, or punishment, guess what's going to happen? People are going to shut down. This is where acceptance becomes so important. Suppose someone says, I need more affection before I feel ready. That could be heard as criticism, or it could be heard as information. A defensive partner might take it personally and turn it into a fight. We've been dating for so long. What are you talking about? I've been ready for so long. Why are you taking so long? A mature person would try to understand what is being asked for. And that is not always easy. No one loves hearing that something is missing, especially in such a personal area. If the goal is real intimacy, the conversation has to matter more than the ego. This also applies after sex. People rarely talk about that part enough. After sex, there's often a shift. There's always a shift. Not often a shift. There's always a shift. Sex changes everything. It might be emotional, physical, awkward, beautiful, confusing, or all of that mixed together. For some people, the moments afterwards are just as meaningful as the sex itself. They don't want to feel used. Maybe they want to cuddle. Maybe they want validation. For others, they might not think much of it. But that difference can create pain if nobody talks about it. Maybe one person needs closeness after sex and the other person naturally becomes quiet. Maybe one person wants reassurance and the other assumes everything is fine. Maybe someone feels emotionally exposed afterwards and does not know how to say that without sounding insecure. And see, that's the other part of it. You have to be in a safe space so that if you're going to say something that might make you sound insecure, because you probably are, that you're not going to get ridiculed, that they're not going to take a jab at you about it. Those little things matter, not because every moment needs to be analyzed to death, but because intimacy lives in the details. People feel cared for when their inner world is considered. I mean, think about it. How many people say that it's about the small things? Buying flowers on a random day, cooking their favorite meal, just so that they know they feel loved, cared for, and safe. And that does not happen through guessing. It happens through paying attention and being willing to ask and talk about it. The longer people avoid these conversations, the harder they become. And that's where we move from dating into relationships. In the beginning, sex can feel easy because everything is new. Attraction carries a lot. The novelty does some of the work. People are discovering each other, and there's often excitement in that discovery. Then life starts doing what life does. Stress, work gets demanding, kids may come into the picture, whether previous or thinking about having some of your own. Bodies change, health changes, energy changes, emotional wounds accumulate if they're not addressed. the relationship slowly becomes more about schedules and bills and responsibilities and even worse, routines, that does not mean love has to disappear. It just means the relationship enters a different stage, and different stages require different conversations. See, the couples who never learned how to talk about sex in the beginning often find themselves completely lost when sex changes later. And they do not know how to bring it up without sounding rejected, pressured, angry, needy, critical, or embarrassed. So they just avoid it. Then the silence becomes its own problem. One person starts wondering why they are not wanted. The other person starts feeling pressure every time affection begins. A hug no longer feels like a hug because it carries an expectation. A rejection no longer feels like one moment because it gets added to a growing history of hurt. That is how sex becomes loaded. And once sex is loaded, the conversation becomes even harder. This is why sex is often where the problem finally becomes impossible to ignore. The bedroom reveals the emotional state of the relationship. It may reveal resentment that has been building. It may reveal a lack of closeness that no one wanted to admit. It may reveal that one person feels like they are giving too much outside the bedroom and has nothing left inside it. A couple may argue about frequency, but the real conversation might be about feeling unseen. One person may complain about rejection, while the other person is carrying months of pressure. The issue on the surface might be the sex, but underneath it, it might be loneliness, exhaustion, resentment, insecurity, or even disconnection. If the conversation stays on the surface, nothing changes. That is why we are not having enough sex, or sex is not that great, is usually too small of a conversation. The better conversation is, what is happening between us that is making intimacy harder? That question opens a door. It gives both people room to talk about what is happening in the relationship instead of turning the bedroom into the only battlefield. Once the conversation opens up, they may realize the issue is not as simple as attraction disappearing. See, the funny thing with attraction, what we hear can change what we see. And a lot of people don't even realize that. How we're treated, what the person says to us, how they talk to us. Do they even care? Do our needs get met? It could be stress. It could be emotional distance. It could be something medical. It could be the quiet damage of feeling criticized all day and then being expected to feel wanted at night or to even have to perform. The point is that they will never know what they are actually dealing with if they keep arguing about sex without talking about the relationship around it. The point is not to guess the answer before the conversation happens. The point is to have the conversation, and yes, it's going to be uncomfortable. But most important conversations are usually uncomfortable at first, especially when they've been avoided for way too long. But see, the thing is, discomfort is not the enemy. Not knowing, not having this conversation, silence is far more dangerous. Silence lets people build stories in their head. It lets one person assume they are unwanted and the other assume they are being used. It turns every touch into a question and every rejection into evidence. Over time, the relationship becomes filled with meaning nobody actually confirmed. And see, that's not intimacy. That is two people living beside each other inside separate assumptions. I've seen this so many times. I've come up a name for it. Having a roommate. And it's not having a partner, even though that's the point, is having a partner. Communication brings those assumptions into the light. Acceptance decides whether both people can look at them honestly without destroying each other in the process. And this is why I keep saying these two things matter so much. Communication without acceptance turns honesty into a battlefield. Acceptance without communication usually means someone is accepting a version of reality they invented because nobody has said anything clearly. Neither one is enough on its own. A healthy relationship needs both. When your partner tells you something vulnerable about themselves or about sex, the first reaction matters. If you become defensive or mocking them or dismissive or cruel, you may win the moment and completely lose the truth. The person might stop talking. They might keep having sex with you, but they probably don't want to. They might stop initiating it completely. They might begin to resent you because honesty no longer feels safe. And that is how quickly a relationship can break. People think relationships end when someone leaves, cheats, or explodes. Many relationships start ending long before that. They start ending when the truth has nowhere safe to go. Sex is one of the places where that becomes painfully obvious. So what should people do? Start becoming less weird about the conversation? Yeah. Sex is an adult topic. If you are in an adult relationship, it should not be treated like some foreign object that only gets discussed during an argument or after someone is already hurt. You can talk about it with care. You can say things like, I miss feeling close to you, and I don't want this to become resentment. You can say, I have been struggling with desire lately, and I want us to understand why, instead of pretending it is not happening. You can say, I feel pressure around sex right now, and I do not want that pressure to turn into distance between us. These are not attacks, they are invitations. Of course, how you say something matters, timing matters, tone matters. You probably should not start the deepest sex conversation of your life when someone is exhausted, angry, or already feeling rejected. Pick a moment where both people have enough space to hear each other out. But do not keep waiting for the perfect moment forever, because that is just another excuse. At some point, the conversation has to happen because the silence is already speaking. It is speaking through distance, tension, avoidance, frustration, resentment, and the way two people stop reaching for each other. A relationship should not have to get to a breaking point before honesty is allowed, and that is the real lesson. Talk before the problem becomes a crisis. Talk before resentment. Talk because you care about the connection enough to protect it from assumptions. That is what mature intimacy requires. And let me be clear about something. I am not saying communication will fix every problem, or every sexual problem for that matter, because there's issues around health and libido and trauma and medication and hormones and attraction and orientation and compatibility and even personal history. And some of those things may require medical help, therapy, coaching, or very honest decisions about whether the relationship can even work. Communication is not magic. But without communication, you don't even know what problems you're dealing with. And that is why it has to come first. You cannot fix what you are unwilling to name. And you cannot build real intimacy with someone if the most vulnerable part of the relationship are being handled through avoidance, guessing, and resentment. I don't know how many times I've had to say that. It is so important to be able to be vulnerable with your partner. And it's funny when you think about it. Because again, as I mentioned in the beginning of this, it is so much easier for people to take their clothes off and be naked and engage than to open up their emotions and to be vulnerable with another human being. And that is why good sex starts before the bedroom. It starts in the way people talk to each other. It starts in whether truth feels safe. It starts in whether both people can handle honesty without turning it into shame. It starts in whether each person is willing to understand the other rather than to protect their ego. The bedroom is not separate from that. The bedroom is an extension of that. If the relationship has warmth, respect, honesty, and emotional safety, intimacy has something healthy to grow from. If the relationship is full of silence, resentment, criticism, and pressure, sex will eventually start carrying all of that weight. And when it does, people will call it a sex problem. But again, the majority of the time, if not all the time, sex is only where the truth finally shows up. Because this conversation is not really about being wild and adventurous or experienced or even impressive. It's about being honest. It's about being mature enough to understand that sex is personal, vulnerable, emotional, physical, and relational all at once. People can pretend it's simple, and for some, it might just be. But inside relationships, it rarely stays simple if the communication around it is weak. So have the conversation. Have it before confusion starts. Have it when something changes. Have it when you feel distance growing and you still care enough to reach for each other. Because it's literally the beginning of the end. And when someone is honest with you, do your best not to punish them for being honest, because that is part of being vulnerable. Giving them that safe space is one of the most loving and caring things you can do for somebody, because real intimacy needs a place where truth can land. Anyways, I think I've talked for enough about this, because at the end of the day, communication and acceptance. Being vulnerable. Listen, if this episode made you think about anything about your dating life, your relationship, or a conversation you've been avoiding, I hope that it has given you the strength, or at least the self-awareness, to take that step forward and have that talk. And instead, if you have any other questions, you know exactly where to find me. Go to joeyfrancis.com. That's joeyfrances.com. And you can send me a message there. Find my books, The Blueprint Method, and learn more about the work that I do. And remember this: if you are adult enough to have sex, then you need to be adult enough to talk about it. Until next time.